Please listen carefully.
Perception,
architecture,
radio.
Hello. Welcome to Perception Architecture Radio. This episode is with Dr. Robert Glover. Dr. Robert Glover is a psychologist and a therapist, and he's famed for writing the book No More Mr. Nice Guy. Very interesting conversation I had with Dr. Robert Glover about nice guy patterns and people pleasing and how this whole phenomenon dynamic got started and what to do about it really when you get stuck in this kind of people pleasing, inauthentic, what would you call it, a rut? I guess you could call it a rut. You could probably call it that, and that would be fine. Dynamic, that would be a better word, a more dynamic word even, if you will. Entertain that idea, and anyway, this conversation speaks for itself. You can probably hear something scrabbling around on the floor. That's a kitten, in case you were wondering. Having a whale of a time. So anyway, without further ado, here's Dr. Robert Glover and me having a conversation. Hope you enjoy it. All right. Hello, everybody. Today I'm here with Dr. Robert Glover, and it's a real privilege to have with me today this renowned author and psychotherapist. He's the author of two books, I think, if I've got that right.
Yeah.
I just discovered your second one today, actually. So there's No More Mr. Nice Guy, which I have on Audible, Kindle, and hardback. It was so kind of direct in its message to me that I felt like I wanted to absorb it from multiple sensory mediums. And I think it's done a great job of that. Plus his latest book, which I just did discover today, The Dating Essentials for Men. And so here's a line that I really loved from his site. Dr. Glover has helped thousands of nice guys transform from being passive, resentful victims to empowered, integrated males. The passive, resentful victim is something that I've, let's say, flirted with in the past as an identity, to put it lightly. But yeah, thanks to Dr. Glover's work, he's been helping me through that. So Dr. Glover has worked with thousands of men, hosts online classes, does workshops, has podcasts, and a lot of other resources on his website, drglover.com. He's a frequent guest on radio talk shows and has been featured in numerous local and national publications. So I also attended one of his spin-off groups in London for a while I was living there. That was hosted by Rowan Andrews and Ame Akada, and it's a very good group. You can check them out on Meetup. And I think there are now lots of these groups all around the world practicing this, the No More Mr. Nice Guy stuff. And they're full of men that are wanting to join and help themselves become more integrated and useful to themselves and the wider society, which is probably a good thing. So, Dr. Glover, welcome. It's a real privilege to be talking with you here, so thanks for joining us. Perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about your journey with being a nice guy and the transition from a sensitive new age guy, which I feel like I'm potentially just at the tail end of now. I've been quite deep into that for a while and, still working through those archetypes into an integrated male. And I'm sure you've told the story thousands of times before, but if you could just give us a little background about who you are and how you came into this work.
All right, Tom, thanks for the invitation to be here and for that introduction. And I'll tell my story for the 1,001st time. But yeah, I like talking about it because I tell people that I'm a recovering nice guy, and my book, No More Mr. Nice Guy, is autobiographical. I just use other people's stories to tell my own. And so how I came about to be the author of No More Mr. Nice Guy and be talking to you today, if you had met me 30 years ago, I would have said, I'm a nice guy. I would have told you that. I'm one of the nicest guys you'll ever want to meet. And what I didn't understand is why, like, everybody else wasn't the same. Now, part of this I know was me being a reaction to my father, and trying to be different from him, being self-centered and moody and angry and controlling, and also trying to be different than the type of men I heard a lot of women complaining about when I was a teenager and young man in the 60s and 70s, with kind of the big wave of feminism and the negativity towards men in general. I thought, well, I don't want to be that guy. I'll be a good guy. I'll treat people well. I won't be a jerk. But how how this process came about is I was in my second marriage, and I thought I was treating my wife well, trying to be a good guy, trying to treat her better than her ex, raising her kids. And she was never happy. And she was actually kind of upset most of the time, and never wanted to have sex anymore, and was critical of me. And all I wanted was her to appreciate me and value the things I did for her. And then she started kind of focusing on me, and she said, you know, you're passive aggressive, you're angry. I'd rather be with a jerk that at least I know a jerk's going to treat me bad all the time. You treat me well, everybody thinks you're a great guy, and then out of the blue you do things that are really hurtful. She said, you need to go get help. And I thought, I need to go get help? You're the one that's unhappy and angry all the time. So I thought, why am I the one who's in trouble here? I'm the good guy. So but I went and joined a men's group and started going to see a therapist. And luckily I bumped into some really good stuff. And, things like setting boundaries and asking for what I wanted, and being clear and direct, and being honest and authentic, and began to realize, well, okay, maybe I wasn't so easy to live with. And as I was doing kind of my own work, I was a marriage and family therapist at the time. And I started noticing that couples were coming to work with me, and often the men were saying the same thing I had been saying in my relationship. And they're coming in with their girlfriends or their wives. And the guys are saying, I'm a nice guy. I'm one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. I do everything for her. I try to please her. I try to make her happy. I treat her better than her ex. I'm raising her kids. And she's never happy. And she's always angry. And she never wants to have sex anymore. And I thought, I can finish these guys' sentences. And it was really a revelation to me that I wasn't the only person thinking if I was just nice and treated, in this case, a woman well, she'd be appreciative of me and love me back. Now, I also started noticing, a few single men, the guys that were not in a relationship, saying, what's my problem? How come I treat women well? I'm not like the jerks. I listen to them talk about their problems. I'm not, pushing a sexual agenda. And guys were saying, women tell me, oh, someday you're going to make some lucky woman really happy. And I go, well, why don't you? Why doesn't this woman who's telling me that want to be with me? She thinks some other woman would be lucky to have me. Why wouldn't you? So I was starting to hear these voices and realize I'm not the only person who thinks this way. And so I started No More Mr. Nice Guy men's group probably about 25 years ago. We met every other Wednesday. And on Wednesdays, I started just writing chapters to give to these guys. Nowadays, we'd probably call them blogs. But I just started writing. What was I learning? What was I understanding? What were my thoughts and theories about how we became nice guys? What was essential for us to work on to become more authentic, more integrated, more happy, to get what we want? And while I kept doing these groups and then added another group and kept writing, these guys, and often their partners, were saying, Robert, you need to write a book. You need to go on Oprah. There's lots of people out there that need this information. So I did. I kept writing, for over here about 6 years it took to write the book. It took about another 3 years to get it published. It came out in print edition in early 2003. So as we talk, that's been about 16 years ago. And the book is doing amazingly well. My royalty checks get bigger every year. So there's a lot of people responding to it. And I do a lot of interviews now, and people often say, my book helped change their life, or my book's one of the top books they recommend to their coaching clients. So I think it really helped fill a void that was out there for good information for men. When I started doing my work, all that was really out there was maybe like, Iron John by Robert Bly and Michael Meade. And so you could go, out in the woods and beat a drum and, say, ho. But that was really all there was for men. There wasn't a lot more going on at that time. So I'm just thrilled that now there's so many resources for men, whether it be groups, whether it be working around dating, social anxiety, relationship, entrepreneurs. So that's me. That's my story. And that's how No More Mr. Nice Guy came into the world.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I think what you were talking about with your book. The first time I read it, the first time I read it, because I've cycled through it a couple of times, but the first time I read it, I was looking at the bullet points. It was like, nice guys are like this, nice guys are like this. And I was like, oh my God, I guess this is a common reaction you have with people. It's like, I think he's talking about me directly. Like, how did he know me so well?
Well, let me read you an email I got just before we got online. It's really short. Said, a coworker at my job recommended your book. I thought the title was cheesy and silly and wasn't going to read it. After a few weeks, I finally read the book in one sitting and could not stop reading once I started. It's like you wrote the book and know my life story without knowing me. It's oddly comforting to know many others in your book go through the same stuff and they can be improved with work and mindset shift. Like I said, I just read that email just before, we got online with each other. And yeah, I've been hearing that for like 16 years now. How did you know me so well?
Yeah.
Because I'm writing my life story, and there's a lot of us out there thinking, if we just, are nice to everybody and treat them well, we'll be loved and liked and get our needs met, and everybody will think we're great.
Well, it seems like the nice guys are like a modern day archetype, like an archetypal role that people just kind of fall into. So it's really great that you've been able to identify that. Would you say you think it translates to people pleasers in general, like across the sexes, or is it's specifically for men? Or because I've had a lot of women come to me and say, actually, the things that he's writing about also seem to apply to me. And so I was wondering if there's a kind of a relationship with the people pleasers archetype as well.
Very definitely. And lots of women have written me and say they appreciated my book, both in terms of understanding a man in their life, but also that they are nice girls. And I actually think probably the nice girl syndrome preceded the nice guy syndrome.
Right.
My mother was a nice girl. She tried to, serve other people, be nice, get validation. So I was trained to be a nice guy by my mother. Now, really what we're talking about, and I don't use this word in the book, and it was intentional, we're talking about codependency. We're talking about a shared sense of self. I only get value in terms of how other people perceive me or relate to me.
Right.
And that's what codependency is. And I didn't use the word in the book for a couple of reasons. One is that most people associated it with relationships with recovering alcoholics. And also, there were a number of books written for women on codependency, but there were actually nothing written for men. And so I left the word out of the book intentionally because I didn't want people to come to it and then project their own meaning of what codependency means. And I wanted to just talk about what nice guys are about. And it really does boil down to, I think, the same thing for nice girls and nice guys, is at our core sense of self, we don't believe we are okay just as we are. And so, and my theory is that's the result of what I call inaccurately internalized events. So in childhood, all children are narcissistic by nature. We believe we are the cause of everything that happens to us.
It's like a stage of psychological development, narcissism.
It is. Yeah. It is. And it's normal. And this is pre-verbal also, is before a child can even formulate words and talk and remember in terms of words or pictures. But it's a very emotional piece. And that's why it gets embedded in a very deep part of our brain, is internalized. And so if we have a negative experience of any kind as an infant, as a child, we're hungry and nobody feeds us. We cry, nobody picks us up. People around us are angry, or we get abandoned, or whatever it might be. We get spanked, we get screamed at, we get shaken. Whatever it might be, the child always internalizes, I'm the cause of that. And the word that is used to describe that process is called toxic shame. We internalize a belief, there must be something wrong with me. I'm bad, I'm unlovable. And not just that I've done something wrong, there's something fundamentally wrong with me. So if that is a child's core emotional belief, it's not a thought out belief system typically, but it's an emotional belief that then begins to affect the way the child thinks and acts and behaves and interacts in the world and tries to get their needs met. And then what happens then for the nice guy or nice girl is typically they consciously try to become what they think other people want them to be. so that they will be liked and loved and get their needs met, and try to hide anything about themselves, repress it, push it down, get rid of it, anything that might get a negative response from the people around them. And for nice guys, at least, the things they tend to hide the most are their needs, number one, and their sexuality, because they feel like they'll be bad if anybody perceives them to be sexual. So they push all of that down, all the while trying to be that pleaser, that conflict avoider, that giver, that fixer to get love and validation.
Dropping bombs of wisdom there. I think the nice guys have a very complicated relationship with, or nice guys, nice girls have a very complicated relationship with sexuality. And I think you touched on this in your book. I saw you mention it. So, and you mentioned that they typically experience some kind of confusion, I think, with their sexuality. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I did touch on it. I think I basically said every nice guy I've ever met has some major issue around their sexuality.
Yeah.
And this can take a lot of different forms. And for a lot of nice guys, it's kind of like they haven't even identified it, because they maybe perceive what they're experiencing as what they perceive as normal. In the men especially, the big pattern I see with so many nice guys is a dependency on pornography. It's any kind of hidden sexual behavior. And I see a lot of nice guys have issues around sexual performance, sense of inadequacy. A lot of guys struggle with, just any kind of sexual performance issue. And I try to tell men that, I don't like to use the word sex and performance in the same sentence, because sex is not a performance. But, when you don't get an erection, or if you come too quickly, those become things that just feed the sense of shame and inadequacy that a lot of nice guys have. A lot of nice guys are pleasers when it comes to sex, and so they're trying to please their partner to get validation. But unfortunately, like a lot of things nice guys do, the very things we do work against us. So for example, if a guy is trying to please his partner, what he'll usually do is, okay, last time we had sex, I did this and I did that, and she seemed to like it and she seemed to get off on it. So, I'll do that again. I'll do I'll do this and do that again.
Formula.
Yeah, and it becomes a formula, and it becomes boring really quickly, and then the woman loses interest in having sex, and the guy thinks, what's wrong with me? He internalizes what's wrong with me versus, oh, maybe by me doing the same thing repetitively over and over again, that might, have been part of the problem. So the main core that I really do see, though, with the majority of nice guys, especially, in this era, is just a hiding of so much of their sexuality. And what then, because sexual energy is such a powerful life force, is wired into all of it. It's such a strong dynamic that you can't hide it, you can't repress it. So it tends to go underground in some shame-based type behavior. I mentioned the pornography, the masturbation, massage parlors, prostitution, or just trying to repress it completely. And not only does this steal a person's life force from them, and kind of make them like sexually uninteresting because there's nothing out there, but it's all hidden underground. It does go underground, and what that tends to do is it just feeds on the nice guy's sense of shame that he already has. Because if you think about it, one of the most effective ways for a guy in modern culture to feel bad about himself is be addicted to porn. And then, he's spending hours looking at porn. He knows he's wasting time, probably wasting a bunch of money as well. If he's in a relationship, he's lying to his partner saying, no, I don't, or I'll never do it again, or blah, blah. And then he goes and does it again. It's a great way to just feel bad about themselves. And what I've found is that for a lot of guys, especially around porn, that it maybe gets identified as a sexual addiction. I think a lot of these guys are not actually addicted to sex. Most of them aren't having enough sex to be addicted to sex, but they're addicted to the shame. And it's the shame that feeds the intensity. Shame feeds a lot of intensity. And so if you get addicted to that intensity, that's why you keep going back to the behaviors that are self-destructive and not productive, because they're in I'll call it a shame container. You go hide away, kind of like like, your little kid going up in your tree fort, pulling the rope ladder up behind you and looking at daddy's girly magazine, and nobody can bother you, but you're doing something wrong. You're hiding out, blah, blah, blah. And there's something that feels kind of good and buzzy about that.
Rebelling against the system or something like that.
Yeah. But at the same time, you're like hiding and feeding shame into normal, healthy, human impulses and experiences.
Hey, that's a really interesting point. So what you're saying is like it feeds this shame core, the behavior, but I've never heard it described as an addiction to the shame core, like an addiction to this core identity of shame. I think that's a really fascinating way to put it. I wanted to then lead into this. So this idea of you think that nice guys or nice girls are maybe sexually frustrated in some way, and do you think that has a relationship with something you mentioned in the book is like nice guys are full of rage, but they're very out of touch with it? And do you think there's a relationship between that kind of sexual frustration and rage, or repressed sexuality and some kind of rage or anger?
Often. So let me kind of, come at it from probably what's behind both the frustration and the rage. And we'll tee this up because it applies to a lot of other things with nice guys. And it's around something that I call covert contracts. And a covert contract is just that. It's a contract that's covert, i.e. it's often not conscious, but rarely spoken and kind of upfront for everybody to know what are the details of the contract. And nice guys tend to have 3 covert contracts. And all the covert contracts are an if-then proposition. They're all a form of giving to get. So they're all manipulative in nature. Even though the nice guy thinks, I'm being a nice guy, he's actually being fundamentally manipulative and secretive. But
Right.
Covert contract number 1 is, if I'm a good guy, I'll be liked and loved. Now, nice guys tend to add to that, and the women I want to have sex with will want to have sex with me because I'm a good guy. I'm not a jerk. I'm not an asshole. And so that's part of this contract. Well, I'm not like those bad men you women complain about. I'm a good guy. I listen to you talk. I help you do things. I'm patient, blah, 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 blah. And because I'm this good guy, you should like me, love me, and want to have sex with me. As if that was enough to turn women on and, make them want to jump our bones. And we'll come back to the frustration in a minute. Covert contract number 2 is that if I meet everyone else's needs without them having to ask, then they will meet my needs without me having to ask. So nice guys, this is where their giving to get really shows up. Well, I'll do these things for you, and I'll do these, and I'll anticipate what you might need, and I'll do it for you, or I'll fix it, or I'll give you this nice surprise. And in return, you'll appreciate me, which is a big nice guy need, and you'll do things back for me without me having to ask. You'll just anticipate for me like I anticipate for you. Well, unfortunately, the other people or the world or God doesn't know what our covert contract is. Like, we're giving to them and they're supposed to give back. And so often people have no clue, that number 1, they were supposed to be giving back or what it is they're supposed to give back. So nice guys then often don't get their needs met and very, very, their buckets don't get filled. Now, I'll add a caveat to that. Nice guys are often terrible receivers as well. It makes us feel guilty if somebody gives to us, or we're like we're doing something wrong if we have needs, or we're going to get in trouble. And nice guys tend to surround themselves with people that are really shitty at giving. They're usually like broken or burdened or depressed or unemployed or, can't hold a job. And nice guys are really attracted to those kinds of people. And, these people can't take care of themselves. They got nothing else to give to the nice guy. So there's covert contract number 2. Covert contract number 3 is, if I do everything right, then I will have a smooth, problem-free life. Well, number 1, nobody can do everything right. And number 2, where's the rule book that says how to do everything right? The nice guy's the one keeping score. He's got the big scoreboard up in his, bedroom. Well, I did this right. I did this right. I did this right. Then they have this magical childlike belief, I can have this totally smooth, problem-free life. Right. Nobody will ever get mad at me. Nobody will ever leave me. I'll never get fired from a job. I'll never have financial problems. Everything should be this utopian Everything should work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's the issue. The nice guy believes he's doing everything required of him on his side of the covert contracts. I'm being a good guy. I'm giving. I'm doing everything right. I'm following the rules. But when the world doesn't, read his mind and cooperate, and when everybody doesn't like him and love him or want to have sex with him, or when people don't read his mind and meet his needs, or when the world isn't smooth and problem-free, which it isn't, he starts feeling really frustrated, and that frustration often leads to resentment, and the resentment can turn into rage. And probably if you read anything on the internet or any social media, you've probably seen the examples of men having this frustration and rage and resentment at women that that goes beyond even just ranting about it on online forums, and is even can turn homicidal. And so a lot of that really does go back to the nice guy thinking, if I just do all of this, then I should have, women should want to have sex with me. And what happens for a lot of the guys I work with, having a girlfriend and having a woman want to have sex with them is a core piece of their validation, a core piece of their sense of self. Yeah. And so I do work with a lot of nice guys because that have this frustration and have this core belief system, because a lot of things nice guys do don't attract women. We think they should, but they don't. And then we get pissed off at women because they don't seem interested at us. So then we have this rage and resentment, which really doesn't attract women. But then because we can't get a girlfriend or can't get laid, now we start thinking, going back to the toxic shame, it must be because I'm unlovable. Yeah, I can blame the women for all being, hypergamous gold diggers or only being interested in this guy or that guy, not guy. But the bottom line is there's that core shame that what's wrong with me? And because we don't like feeling that core shame, we typically have to blame somebody. It's their fault. It's their fault. It's their fault.
It's an outward projection.
Yes, an outward projection, which just becomes a vicious cycle that repels people and pushes them away, keeps you feeling more alone and isolated. And then, it just keeps repeating itself, and you keep feeling like you're, more and more, I'm not lovable, I'm not worthwhile, I'm not desirable, all because we've identified having a girlfriend or having a woman want to have sex with us is the barometer or the measure or the yardstick of me being a lovable human being. Now, they have absolutely nothing to do with each other, but when you're feeling a lot of frustration and toxic shame, it feels like it has everything to do with each other.
Yeah, I think one of the expressions you used in the book for it was this expression. I remember reading it at the time and thinking like, oh God, is this what I'm doing? And it was something like, these covert contracts are the equivalent to hooking up a hose to your partner's energy levels or draining their energy levels. And it was just like, oh, I had to kind of come back and read that a second time because I didn't want to look at it the first time. It's like, it's such a displeasing thing to think that you might be doing as a nice guy.
And that goes well with the sexual part. So like, for example, if a guy just meets a woman, say single, and he just meets a woman, right? And if he's feeling needy and empty, he will hook up that emotional hose of trying to get the woman to approve of him, validate him, give him a phone number, go out with them. And women feel that. They do. They feel that neediness and they push it away. And then again, the guy thinks, well, it must be because all women can see that I'm an unlovable loser. But in relationship, because I used to do this as well, I would approach my wife for sex, but it had really nothing to do with physical or emotional or intimate connection. It had to do with emotional neediness. And so like, I'd be really needy, I'd be really indirect, I kind of rub her back, or I'd make some indirect innuendos about maybe we might have sex later. And then like, she would just shut down and just, push me back. And then what I interpreted was that she was rejecting me for sex, because what I'd done is that I'd wrapped a sexual request basically around my emotional neediness. And so for people who are listening, can't see it. It's kind of like I got my fist and that's emotional neediness. My other hand is like the sexual request wrapped around it. So when a woman then can feel that emotional neediness, that big hose with the sucking sound coming at her, like, love me, fill me up, make me feel valuable and worthwhile and not a piece of shit, not a loser. Please do that for me. They reject that neediness, but if we've wrapped a sexual request around it, we think we're being rejected for sex. And then that often triggers a lot of rage and resentment in men. It's kind of like, well, I do all this for you, and all I want is you to appreciate me and want to have sex with me. And again, the woman is not so much rejecting the sex as she is the emotional neediness. And you're right. The good news is you read that and thought, damn, I do that. That's the good news. That's the good start. Then there's a solution, and that is, we go work on our neediness by taking responsibility for getting our needs met in very healthy, adult, mature ways. Then, as a byproduct of that, we actually start looking much more attractive to other people.
Yeah, well, I didn't. So the first time I read it, I didn't go, damn, I do that. First time I read it, it's like, no, that's nothing to do with me. And then the second time I read it, I was like, you should probably pay attention to that, because you didn't like it the first time you read it and you felt that. So
good for you. That's a good thing to pay attention to. If you have resistance to something, resistance is usually telling us a very important story.
Yeah, right. Well, definitely important in my case. One of the things that I noticed about what you're saying there, it sounds like there's this kind of paradigm where nice guys or people pleasers go to other people to try to get their bucket filled up, if we use that kind of metaphor, and try to hook up these hoses for validation. If I do something here, will you please validate me and fill me up from the inside, which seems like a kind of an unhealthy dynamic. And what it seems like is your work focuses a lot more on getting people to fill themselves up from the inside first, like to fill their own bucket so they have enough to kind of give out and overflow. And I think this really applies to social anxiety, particularly if you're particularly socially anxious. Maybe you have some comments on this. If you're particularly socially anxious, usually you're feeling like you're not quite good enough, and I know, because I went through social anxiety, like really severe social anxiety myself, that when I was in interactions with people, like I was so uptight about trying to say the right thing, or like the correct thing, to get the correct response of validation to kind of fill me up. I felt so empty and worthless on the inside that you break out in all these kind of physical symptoms like sweating and shaking. And it's like, oh my God, this is the worst situation imaginable. And you're just talking to a person. It's like, what the hell's going on? But yeah, it really sounds like your work is more focused on getting people to start filling themselves up from the inside. So maybe you have some things to say about that, like how you go about getting to do that.
That's a good question. And I'm going to share some things with you that, I finished writing No More Mr. Nice Guy, like I said, about 20 years ago. But I've continued to work on myself and worked with thousands of nice guys since then. And so the piece I'm going to share with you is not detailed like this in the book. It'll be more in the book I'm writing right now. And in fact, it's the chapter that I'm working on right now on the book I'm currently writing. And I think it does relate well to the whole social anxiety piece. And some of your listeners might be familiar with Mark Manson's work. His newest books are Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck and Everything's Fucked. But the first book he wrote was called Models. And I used to get a lot of emails. Do you know Mark Manson? Do you know Mark Manson?
Yeah.
I haven't met him yet. But the reason is he mentions No More Mr. Nice Guy at the very end of his book, Models. So the success of his current books has probably helped sell books for me. So I'm grateful for Mark for doing that. But in the Models book is called, I think the subtitle is Attracting Women with Honesty. And his core theme is basically don't be needy. I'm giving away, the whole book. So just don't be needy. That's how you attract women. And if you're right, if you're going into any social context feeling needy. Now, I know there's other factors that tie in. We're not going to do an entire book, on how to cure social anxiety. But here's one piece that I think plays in. That's that emotional neediness. And I tell people my definition of adulthood, of a mature adult, is a person who can take full responsibility for his needs and his actions. So you are a grown up. When you were a kid, your parents were responsible for meeting your needs. And there's a theory of child development. And if your listeners want to go read a little bit more about it, pick up Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled.
Okay.
And he talks in there about if parents pay attention to the child's needs, and parents are first filling their own bucket up, paying attention to their children's needs and meeting those needs in timely, judicious ways. And I add to that consistent. So timely, judicious, and consistent ways. The child internalizes a belief, I'm lovable, I'm valuable, my needs are important, and the world is like my family. And then they go out into the world, assuming that the world's going to respond to them like their family did. They're just going to assume, hey, I'm going to get my needs met, and I'm important, and I'm likable. So if that is what makes a little child, if that's what fills a child's bucket and creates an emotional belief system that I'm valuable, I'm lovable, my needs are important, and the world's going to function in the same way as my family did. I think the same thing works for adults. Now, it's our job to do what either our parents didn't do or what their job is finished. So the term I use is that we as adults have to consciously create multiple cooperative reciprocal systems. Now, by a cooperative reciprocal system, what I often have people do, like in workshops, is I'll have them get a paper out, draw a stick figure of themselves in the middle of the paper, and maybe even draw a little bucket that we're going to, imagine them filling. And then draw a whole bunch of circles outside of them on the paper with an arrow pointing towards the circle and towards them. So all the arrows are going to have it's going to be a line with two points on a point on each end, pointing towards the arrow and pointing back at them. That's the reciprocal part. There's something flowing both directions. Mm-hmm. And then I have the people doing this assignment fill those circles in with all of the cooperative reciprocal systems they have in their life. This might be friends, it might be church, it might be professionals, it might be their accountant, their attorney, their personal trainer, their dentist, their doctor, their chiropractor, massage therapist, and to map this out. Because the more of these reciprocal systems we have, and what I mean by a reciprocal system is that everybody involved is getting something of value out of that system.
Like a win-win all around.
It's win-win. It's flowing both directions. That's why I had the arrow pointing both directions. You and I have a cooperative reciprocal system. You invited me to come talk on your podcast. You're getting some value. Your listeners, whom you also have a reciprocal system with, get value. I get some value out of it in that I like talking. And the bigger value is maybe I'll sell some books, right? Now, none of that is like, we haven't written up this contract that says blah, 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 but we both assume it will be a valuable exchange and use of our time and energy, okay? Now, healthy, responsible people consciously fill their life up with lots of these. And in my experience, the more of these I add to my life, the easier life gets and the better my life gets. So, when I got an accountant that, handled all my books, when I got a money manager to help teach me about how to invest and deal with money and save for retirement, when I got a doctor, when I got a dentist, when I got a massage therapist, when I got a chiropractor, when I got all these different systems, when I got a coach, when I joined a men's group, when I started, a writer's accountability group within my men's group, my life kept getting better because everybody is getting something of value out of these. So that's where I start the homework is let's identify what you have now. Then I have them do a second page where we do a number of circles again with them in the middle. And I say, let's identify the cooperative reciprocal systems you want to add to your life. So one time getting a new accountant was one thing on a circle. So, and it's funny, once you put these on a circle, all of a sudden new accountants show up, or money managers, financial advisors show up.
It's like you've got a solid request out there. It's like, here's what I want.
You're open to it. You're available. And maybe you look, or maybe somebody gives you a recommendation. But once you, state it, I need this in my system to help me get my needs met and fill my bucket up, it's often quite easy to find and things come your way. It's been my experience. Okay, so that's part 2 of the assignment. Identify where you need and maybe want to be adding over the next few weeks, few months, few years. What other people, professionals, and organizations do you want to add to this, this bucket filling brigade that you have? The third part of the assignment is that they now do another page and identify the systems they have that are not particularly cooperative or reciprocal at this time. And these can be family members, they can be old friends, they can be organizations we're a part of, but we don't go anymore, or we don't believe that anymore, or it's not, we have a gym membership that, we pay every month, but we never go, whatever. And healthy people are consistently looking at the systems they have and asking, are they still cooperative? Are they still reciprocal? And maybe we have to go renegotiate that. Or maybe we realize, okay, I've not been contributing my part, and maybe we start showing up. Maybe we have to ask the other person to start giving more, or doing it differently. Or maybe we just need to prune it back and move on. And that's, probably we don't still have relationships with every high school or college buddy we used to be close to. Yeah. At some point, you prune those back. They just don't serve anymore. So it's a constant process of looking at what we have, what we need, and what we don't need, or what isn't serving us. Now, can you imagine if you've consciously, and you do this for a lifetime? I'm 63 and I'm still very much doing this process. If your bucket is being so filled because you have so many resources in your life of people and professionals and institutions that are all glad to help you get your needs met, have a good life, do whatever it is you need to get done. Some of the people you pay, some of the people it's just a friendship, or it's like you and I, we've just agreed to help each other's world be better in this way. If your life is filled with that, can you imagine then going into public and interacting with other people? Your bucket's full, right? Yeah. You're not going in with a sense of emptiness or fear, or how can I get them to like me so that they'll help fill my bucket up? There is none of that. And people are attracted to that. Going back to the Mark Manson piece there from his book, is that probably the most attractive thing anybody can do, man or woman, is to be not needy. It's attractive to be filled and overflowing. It gives you a sense of confidence, a sense of security, a sense of well-being, and people are attracted to those things. So that's my best piece of advice. And I tell people who are listening to this, sit down and do that assignment. Get out 3 big pieces of paper and get your markers out and go to work on it. I promise you, it will change your life. It will make your life completely different just doing this assignment.
That's a really interesting idea. It's like a little harem of kind of good energy, mutually reciprocated. No, wait, mutually beneficial reciprocations. I got there in the end.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I always reverse what I call it. Sometimes I call it cooperative reciprocal system. Sometimes I call it reciprocal cooperative systems. Sometimes I add another adjective in there as well. Yeah. Just add as many adjectives as you want. It just keeps getting better.
Yeah. Well, that sounds good.
There we go. That was a conversation with Dr. Robert Glover. Great conversation. Really like his stuff, Dr. Robert Glover. I like the way he talks about codependency and how this thing is codependency. It's not necessarily a nice guy. We've got a little situation with a kitten down here. Maybe he'll show himself at some point, or maybe he'll just keep running around causing trouble. Who knows? But that's what you can hear. So yeah, when he's talking about codependency and emotional addictions, like you're addicted to shame and your governor of your mind creates behaviors that help you to sustain and maintain that emotional state, because it's like where is your emotional center? Where do you kind of live primarily in your emotions? And you'll have something maybe that feels not comfortable per se, but it's like it's more comfortable than uncertainty, and so that tends to be where it's like your more stable emotional state. I'm a kind of person who generally feels afraid, or anxiety is generally my stable emotional state, even though it's inherently quite miserable, or depressiveness. And I think it's really just like his work is about looking at what are the belief systems that actually create that, and what are the way that you've interpreted events and internalized events in the past that create that barrier to the thing that's alive in you. And that when you create the barrier to the thing that's alive in you, you're not really letting it in and through your body. And so that's obviously quite detrimental, because it's like you kind of, you know it's there, you know that there's something going on inside of you, you don't know exactly what it is, but you feel afraid to look at it and to actually feel it. And one of the things I really like about his work was he said something about feelings. I can't remember if it was in this part or the next part or one of his books, but he was like, feelings don't kill you. It's like, oh yeah, that's... It's kicking off down there. Feelings don't kill you. I like that a lot, because I think maybe especially as men, we have this idea that feelings are bad and you shouldn't, or if you're a man, you don't really care about feelings, you're not really into any of that kind of stuff. And I guess that would be one of the elements that makes it, well, that's like what do you call it? It's codependency. No, it's just like a kind of a toxic emotional pattern. I want to try to avoid the term toxic masculinity, because I really dislike that term. I think it's really, I can understand what it means, but I think it occurs across the sexes. I don't think it's strictly a man problem or a masculine trait. I think it's, like many things, it spreads across genders. And one of those things where if you haven't created a kind of a space inside yourself to feel your feelings and let them in, and like let that thing that's alive in you inside you, well, for one, you're cutting yourself off from creativity and inspiration, and you're blocking things up, and you're becoming repressed, and then that subverts itself. It's like you're pushing stuff into the shadow, then that subverts itself and comes out in different ways, and you start acting up or acting out out of an unconscious part of you. So it's really important to get in touch with all of those things. And it's hard, man. It's like, it's no joke. It's a difficult job, and it takes... I haven't necessarily seen that there's an ending to it. You just keep going and keep going, and you keep opening up space. Meditation practice is very good for that, I've found. And you just keep that practice of like regularly being in touch with that thing that's alive in you, and that's regularly being in touch with life. I mean, it sounds a bit obvious. Maybe it sounds obvious to me. I don't know if I've explained it very well, but being in touch with the thing that's alive inside of you, which is the feeling and not the thought. Like, thoughts are just kind of dead narratives, really. They're the things that you use to, I guess, structure containers for your feelings. But the thing that's alive in you, if you're in touch with that, then you're more in touch with life. And that seems like a pretty good thing. I think we could all do with ways to get more in touch with that, but it can be quite anxiety inducing, because these things are quite deep and they go quite far down, and there'll be lots of periods where if you're starting to do that kind of work, where you start getting in touch with stuff and you just need help, like you need support with it, you need somebody to kind of be with you and validate you and say, this is the experience of fear, or this is the experience of shame, or this is what anxiety feels like, and you can just like soften to that, and you can breathe and relax, and take your time with it. Take your time with things. That's a good idea, isn't it? That's another thing that we probably could do with more of. Maybe it would be beneficial to take more time with things. So, what else did he say? Yes, that's right. What else was he talking about? He was talking about the mutually cooperative reciprocal relationships. I think I got that right. this is a good idea. I like the exercise he did where he's like, you put you in the middle and then you draw a load of circles around you and then you list out the things that you give energy to, and they don't give you anything back. They just drain your energy. It's like pouring it down a toilet. And then you do another one of these diagrams where you put you in the middle and then you put the circles around, and then you consciously choose, like, what are the relationships that I give energy to and they give energy back. Like, I feed them and they feed me back. And that's like a mutually cooperative, beneficial relationship. And as you start to fill up your life with those kinds of things, it could be like, oh, when I go running, when I give energy to that, I feel great afterwards. I start to feel alive and invigorated. Or when I spend time with this person, like, we both have a good bounce and we both get on well, and like ideas are exchanged and the conversation feels really alive, and that's really great. And you can obviously, the way that you interact with people is going to have an effect on that, and so you can become a generator of that kind of thing, and you learn more skill with communication and whatnot. Hello, this is the one that's been causing all the trouble, isn't it? You've been up to a bit of mischief. Go on. Off you go. Yeah, so the more you fill your life up with those relationships that really feed each other, and it's like the same as hanging out with people that genuinely want the best for you and you genuinely want the best for them, and it's like, wow, that's great. That's a really good thing to have in your life, or activities that provide that similar kind of thing. And then that starts to fill you up energetically, and then you become like this. It helps your capacity to be a generator, which is a great thing. Like, you're consciously creating the experience of your life instead of being a passive recipient of its effects. But one of the other things he talked about was, like, if you give out stuff, then it's really dodgy tripod, as you can see. If you give out stuff, you've got to work on your capacity to receive stuff as well, because that's the other thing. It's like, I think he mentioned in there, he felt very uncomfortable with people giving to him, and it's like there's some worth barrier there, and you have to really deal with that. Like, you have to kind of go and take that on and say and look at it properly, because it's like, well, my inability to receive stuff is actually not good for me and not good for other people, because they don't get the opportunity to give to me, and they don't feel good about giving to me because I'm resistant to it. But also it's detrimental to me, because if I can't receive stuff, I can't kind of give more stuff, and I don't get to enter one of these feedback loops, which is not great. I want to be in one of those feedback loops, because that's where all the motion and all the life is, so that's a good thing. And yeah, another one of his good hello, we've got another visitor. Another one of his good affirmations, which is, let's not walk on the computer, shall we? Which was really, I thought was really grounding, especially if you're a guy or anybody really who's trying to get into, I want to get more in touch with feelings and with life, but I want to do so in a way where I'm not just this kind of molten mess. I want to be able to do it in a way where there's a holding container for it and a holding space, and it's like I can get into it and feel okay about feeling. Then I like this. It's a very simple statement. It's like, I can handle it. And you relax and you drop that into your subconscious, like, yeah, I could handle that. This is just anxiety. This is the experience of anxiety. I can handle this. This is the experience of whatever. I can handle this. I can handle a bit of this kind of feeling. And it's a very different energetic approach to what usually happens is you have this feeling and then you have a meta layer. It's like the way that you meet the feeling, the meta layer of, here's some fear. I'm afraid of the fear, so I'm kind of rising up to meet the fear with more fear, which creates more fear. It's like, if some feeling comes on, it's like, all right, I'm going to breathe and relax and soften and kind of, I can handle this. That's fine. That's probably about it. I think that's a good deal of rambling off me there. So yeah, good. So that's probably about it. Been away for a while now, and yeah, I guess I'm just figuring out this whole podcast lark and seeing what's a way that it can work where it's really good, and I'm trying to make it a little bit simpler now because I see that, what's that expression, that complexity is the enemy of progress. Like, man, that's so true. I've seen my brain making things so complicated and then not making any progress because suddenly it's this huge thing, and it's like, how am I going to take on something this big? And of course, as we know, you don't really take on the big thing, you just take on the next step, and you break things down, and you break things down, and you just carry on, and things just generally go the way that they go, and there's not much else you can do about that. So, alright, that's probably it. Thanks for watching / listening, and I hope to catch you again soon. See ya. So what I forgot to mention in that last part is that part 2 of the Robert Glover podcast is coming out at some stage in the near future. So if you want to hang on for that, I'll do my best to get it edited as quickly as possible and not leave as much of a gap between them as I have been doing. All right, well, that's it. So thanks everybody again for listening, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Perception, architecture, radio.